This technical video is a step-by-step of what to do with a brand new firewall. So we will first register the firewall on SonicWall website, download the latest firmware, upgrade the firewall to the latest firmware, and do all the basic stuff that needs to be done by default, which is change the admin password, ensure the time is right on the unit, and also basic configuration like zone, interfaces, set interfaces. We'll do VLAN tagging as well, and we will actually look briefly at access rules. So let's get going on this. So we have a brand new firewall to install here. What I have is a TZ670 that we need to configure, and we'll do it again from scratch. So first thing is to go on SonicWall to register that firewall. So go on cloud.sonicwall.com. If you do not have an account, create one. Here I will just log in with my account. So then you go into the My SonicWall icon and go into Workspace and Register Product. So here you can have multiple tenant. Tenant could be different customer you have, or if you are the customer, could be different offices or different sub companies that you guys have. So here I'll just register that firewall into my home tenant. And here you need to input the serial number, which you can find on the box itself where it says serial number and authentication code, or you do have it underneath the firewall here, serial number and authentication code. So we'll just proceed. Serial number, authentication code, and give it a friendly name. We'll call it TZ670. Please note here, if you do have a lot of firewall to register at once, here you could download a CSV template to put all serial numbers, authentication code, and all the info, and then re-upload that CSV for mass registration of firewalls. Next. So here we do have different ways of managing the firewall, and the different options are available based on licenses on the firewall. So there is cloud management available with zero touch config, and we will not do it because I've done a video on it on which is called NSM. So I will put a link in the description box down below. So if you want to see what is NSM and cloud management and have zero touch config, so the firewall just you get someone to just connect cables, firewall boots up, it shows up in your management interface, and configuration templates get pushed automatically. This is stuff we have, but here I will just do a very simple unbox management, so no centralized management, just me managing the firewall directly. So click on done. And next it brings me into the product detail of my firewall. One thing I want to point out, new firewalls do have something called now a maintenance key. That is a nice feature to have. So if you think about it, you do have, let's say, a company where you have plenty of kiosks where the firewall will be in plain sight for everyone, and people could tamper with them. So the maintenance key is designed to prevent someone from booting the firewall in safe mode and, erasing the configuration or booting it from factory default or upgrading the firmware, or, do anything in safe mode. So the maintenance key is something that when you boot the firewall in safe mode, the first thing you get prompt is give me the maintenance key. And if you don't have it, there is nothing you can do. So that's a great feature in that specific use case. In other cases where, for instance, the firewall is really in a server room where everything is locked down and only a handful of people have a key to get in there, well, something you may want to do is take note of this maintenance key. Maybe not something security wise I would recommend to write it down and put it on a post-it underneath the firewall. So, it's really up to you, just so that there is a maintenance key. So if your firewall is totally down because you managed to lock yourself out and you need to factory default the firewall, you will need to have that maintenance key, but the challenge is you may not have internet access. So you may want to, write it down and maybe put it under a post-it under the firewall only, and only if there is very tight physical access control to the firewall. So I really leave this up to you. All I wanted to tell you is about that maintenance key. If you want to boot the firewall in safe mode, with the paperclip, you will need that code to do it. In here, you do have a tab for firmware. Always a good idea for everything you have, whether it's a firewall, a switch, an access point, anything. Always a good thing to update the firmware of it. So here you can simply pick the latest one and hit download, so that will download the latest firmware on your machine. And next step is to connect to the firewall and upgrade the OS. So we'll close this. Here we'll open a new tab. So that's my firewall here. Take a network cable and connect on X0. See, there is a little mention here. X0 is the LAN, X1 is WAN. So I'll just connect to X0. And as you can expect, you just do ipconfig and you look at what's the default gateway, and that is the IP of the firewall, which is pretty much the same for pretty much any firewall I've worked with. So we can see my default gateway is 192.168.168.168. So just go there. Of course, it's HTTPS, so if the browser doesn't add it for you, just add it. Default username and password is admin and password. Here we do get a prompt because the firewall is brand new, which asks, do you want to go through a setup wizard or you want to do things manually? I will go through manual stuff. So one thing we need to do first is to update the OS of the appliance, update the firmware, sorry. And to do so, we need licenses on. So as you can see, it seems pretty clear that the unit is not registered. So we will do this, but in order to do it, we need the firewall to be online. So just connect the firewall to the internet. And to do this, you don't really need to connect it directly to the internet, right? It can be connected to your internal network. So that is my internal network, and I'll just connect it to the WAN port. So the firewall will receive an IP of my network as its external interface, but as long as it gets internet to get it registered and update the firmware, we'll be good to go. So connecting anything that will provide internet to X1. So next we will do is go into our interfaces and ensure that we do have an IP. So I'll click on renew DHCP, refresh, and that should be it. See, I received an IP from my network. So next thing we need to do again is to register this thing. And if you go back on the home menu, you do have a fair amount of choices of buttons you can click to register it. So I feel like picking this one. So click here, select login with my SonicWall, put in again the same username and password you've used to connect here. So type it here. And now we see the firewall is registered. So next step is to update the firmware of the firewall. So remember, we've downloaded the latest firmware. So here we can see I'm running a version 7.0.0.415. So we'll just upload a new firmware and browse the file and just go wherever we've downloaded that firmware. And pick the file and upload. So as you can see, we see current firmware 14.4.15, and the one I uploaded is more recent. It is 8.74. And of course, the firmware you see there, the numbers you see will not match whatever you do, because first, this unit is a beta unit, so it's not the same firmware. So I'm sure you guys won't get any beta firmware unless you're a partner or an employee and you get the luxury of being part of beta. But if you're a customer or reseller, you won't get beta unit when you buy them. And of course, time will be different, right? If you buy this a unit 6 months from now and you watch this video, the numbers you'll see there will not match. The key is just go at the SonicWall website where I showed that register the firewall and download the latest firmware. Whatever the number is, just pick the highest number, which is the most recent firmware. So in my case, 874 is the one. So what I will do here, the small power button, I click on it, and I do have the option to boot the uploaded firmware with current configuration. So that's great if you have a firewall fully configured, it's been running for, I don't know, a year, and now you decide you update the firmware. So you will pick this. So it's going to update the firmware with its current configuration and you'll be good to go. In my case, I do not have any configuration in that firewall. All I've done is register the thing. So what I want is the firewall to boot with the latest firmware without any configuration. So I get it fully fresh. Latest firmware, no config whatsoever. And now I start building. I don't want to update an empty config I had, then I don't know what could have been left from it. So all I want is, again, boot factory default with a brand new firmware. So that can take a couple minutes, and it is perfect time to go get more coffee. Okay, so depending on the coffee machine you have, the firewall may have finished rebooting or not. So in my case, my coffee machine is not that quick, so that was enough. So now I can log back in the firewall, admin and password. And of course, we get back exactly where we were, right? So now it's asking, do you want to go through a guided wizard or do stuff manually? So again, I will say manually. And again, the device is not registered. So again, we will click here to register it. And there is that two-factor authentication coming in again. So here we do have now our brand new firewall with the latest firmware, default configuration, and it is activated. So now is the time where we do start doing the configuration of it. Before moving on, there's two basic steps that needs to be taken on any single devices. And the first one is change the admin password. So go into administration and you got the admin username, hit on change password, type in the old password and the new password and hit OK. The next thing to do is ensure you have the right time. So by default, it is on Western Canada or Western time zone, and just make sure you change it for Eastern time zone, which is in my case, actually make it your time zone actually, and hit accept. Next is to go into network configuration, right? We want to set our interfaces and connect the firewall to get the traffic to flow. So first places to go is into objects. See here, we do have different zones. And personally, I'm a huge fan of network segregation. I've put a link in the description box down below about a video I've done on network segregation. So here I will create one new zone that I will call the shop. The reason why I do this is simply because I want the shop to be isolated from everything else, because the shop is the one that manufacture our product, and if manufacturing stop, we don't sell anymore, no more revenue, no more salary to pay. So that is by far the most important zone in my network, let's say. It is the shop. It should never ever stop. And here you can look at the video I've done on network segregation, but I personally recommend to turn off all of those things here. So see if you take time to read them. Allow generated access rule. Auto-generate access rule to allow traffic between zone of the same trust level. So here is the security type that I forgot. I'll put it as trusted. So if you have this on, it means that any zones that are set as trust will be able to talk to each other, which I don't want. I don't want my zone and my different interfaces to be able to talk to each other without any filtering. I want it to be completely shut down and me to only allow what I want between my LAN and the shop, for instance. So I will turn them all off and again, give it a name, put it into the trust and hit OK. So now I do have the default zones and I do have here one called the shop. And I'll create another zone because I want to have a guest Wi-Fi. So we'll click on add. I will call it guest Wi-Fi. And I will turn everything off again and I'll make it a public zone and click save. Now that I have created different zones that I want to work with, as you can see, we have LAN, WAN, which are the obvious, and I've created two other zones that I want to work with. Next is to set my interfaces and set them as the zone I've created. I'll show you here. So we go into network, and what I want to do is take X2 and make it the network for the shop. So I will click on edit for X2, set it as the shop. I want it to have a static IP and the shop will be this subnet. And I will only allow the shop to ping the firewall. I don't want the shop to be able to try to manage the firewall. Next, so I got my X0 set for employees. I got X2 that will be any networking devices in the shop. I may have like any type of automation for the assembly line or whatever it is, and those needed to be to have network access. So that will be for them. Next, I told you I wanted Wi-Fi, and the challenge I have is I do want employees to be able to connect to the Wi-Fi, and I want them to be on the same network as the wired network for the LAN, and the same goes for the shop. I do have in the shop devices that are wireless devices that are required for the shop and must be into that network because, well, that's where they belong. So that's my network, the shop. So I want a wireless network, and I'm not going to use SonicWall access point. I'll just pretend to use anything else because at the end it won't make much of a difference if it's a SonicWall access point or any other access point. The needs are the same in terms of interfaces. So what we do here, I will connect my access point on X3. And of course, if you want to have multiple networks going on one interface, you need to do VLAN tagging, and most access point will work the same way. So you'll say this SSID is on this VLAN and this other SSID is on this other VLAN. So that's what we will do with X3. So we'll create first a virtual interface. So add interface, virtual interface. It will be on the LAN. It will be VLAN, I don't know, 100. It is going to be connected on X3. So I want VLAN 100 on X3. And one cool thing you can do, see here we do have native bridge mode. So what I will do, instead of assigning an IP on the firewall for that interface, I won't, because actually, let me close this. What I want is this new VLAN to actually be the exact same thing as X1. I want them to be on 192, 168, 168.168, or, you know, you could have changed it, right? You can change those things if you want. So what I'll do on X3, I will add a virtual interface. Again, LAN, VLAN 100. I want this VLAN on X3, and I want this to be a native bridge directly on X0, which is my LAN. And here I could, if I want, enable firewalling between this VLAN and X0, which I will turn off for now, but it could be a good idea to also turn it on so you ensure you have some level of security between the employee wireless and the employee wired network. So see here, I got my X3 VLAN 100, which is a native bridge on X0. So if I have an access point and I connect on the SSID tied to VLAN 100, I will get an IP in this network, and that will be like if I was in that network. And here I'll create another one. That one will be again a native bridge, but for the shop, because I need to have wireless devices in the shop that are part of the automation process and the assembly line, that those devices are wireless as well. So it's going to be, let's say, VLAN 200. It's going to be on the interface 3. And again, it's going to be a native bridge on X2, because as you can see, X2 is the shop network. So now we have VLAN 100, VLAN 200, one is bridge to X0, one bridge to X2. And last wireless network I will want will be my guest Wi-Fi. So we'll create again add interface. This one is going to be the guest Wi-Fi. We'll give it VLAN 300. VLAN 300 will be on X3, but this one we're not going to do a bridge to anything. It's going to be a new interface because it's guest Wi-Fi. I want it to be on its own internal network and I have no single access to anything internally. So, and we will give it an IP. So it'll be this, will allow them to ping the firewall, but I don't want guest Wi-Fi to try to manage the firewall. So see here the difference was instead of picking native bridge, I leave it to static IP mode. So as you can see again, my X3 VLAN 100 is bridged to X0, my LAN. So if you have, again, wireless network, an access point that advertises an SSID, and when in the access point you've set this SSID is tied to VLAN 100, the firewall will receive packet tied to VLAN 100 and will know that it belongs to X0 and treat it like if it was on X0. And the same thing for the shop. And here, the VLAN 300 is my guest Wi-Fi, so this one has an interface as an IP just like any other interfaces. So another thing you may want to do here is to change the IP address on X0, because chances are that this is not the internal network you have at this specific location. So we can click edit and I will change it for 10.1 and I will click OK. And the obvious occur, I lost communication to the firewall because, you know, my browser is going on the old IP and I just changed the IP. And the browser is going to refresh soon, just enough time for my computer to get a new IP address. One thing you may want to do is simply disconnect your laptop. So disconnect my laptop from the firewall, connect it back. So your laptop will be like, oh, a new internet connection, a new network connection. Let's do a DHCP request. And I should get an IP now in that new subnet. And see, I got an IP in that new subnet now. And the browser just woke up. And log in with that new password we've set. That window is telling, hey, there's already someone logged in, and you'd be like, well, that's the IP I used to have. I don't have it anymore. So you can just kick out your old yourself, the old connection you had, and now gain control of the firewall. Next thing is to go set DHCP. So see here, DHCP server. So we have DHCP lease here, and there is one that is there by default. As you can see, 192.168.10, which is the subnet I am. Personally, that is just a personal, that's what I do usually. I edit this, and I like keeping the first IPs for stuff with fixed IP addresses, like servers or printer or anything you put with a fixed IP. So I tend to change the range and have DHCP start at like 50 or 100. So it's really up to you. But as you can see, we only have 192.168.10, which is my X0. If you see everything for the shop that we've set here, 172.16, there is no DHCP for it, nor there is a DHCP for the guest Wi-Fi. So if you do not have a DHCP server in those network, well, you may want to use the firewall to be the DHCP. So just click on Add Dynamic. And I like the ease of use here. Interface pre-populated, that's pretty much do it all for me. You select it and you want to say, yes, pre-populate DHCP for me for X2, my shop network, and it puts everything for you. That's like magic. And of course, here I will just start my DHCP like I personally like to do, further in the network range. And of course, here you can set DNS. You can have it inherit DNS from your ISP, or you may want to set an internal DNS server, which would make a lot of sense. And if you do have VoIP stuff and different options, you can set plenty of DHCP options here if you want. So all I've done here is pre-populate for X2, change the thing from IP2 to IP50 as being the first IP of the DHCP scope. Click OK, and I will do the exact same thing for my wireless. So add dynamic here, and start it at 50. And that's it for DHCP. Pretty easy. If you want to do static IP, so DHCP reservation, so you click here, and again you can do some pre-populate for X for interface, but give it a name, put the static IP address you want it to have, and put the MAC address of the device, and you do have again DHCP wins and all the VoIP and DHCP options. They're all there. And you can also see leases, so that is my workstation, and that is the IP I got. And finally, we'll go into access rules. So go into policy, access rule. I do love the small button here where you can select show me policies going from this zone to this zone. So see, we can say show me policy from LAN to WAN. And as you can see, there are 2 default policies that are there. And of course, everything works. I can browse the internet, right? I can go on Facebook and it's search face instead of going to Facebook, but you get the point, right? Internet works, but it's all ports, all protocol, everything wide open. So I personally don't like this. I believe we should control ports that are allowed outbound. I've put the link again in the description box down below for another video I've done about my own personal tips and tricks for security, and that one is one of them. Next, remember we have the shop. So the shop, we can say show me rules from the shop to the WAN. As you can see, there are none. So don't ask like, why is internet not working from the shop? Well, there's not a single policy to allow any traffic outside. So that's the reason for it. So what you can do is click on add. It goes from the shop to the WAN. Then you can select, IP addresses, source and destination, ports, source destination. If you want to do any, and just, open everything out, you just have to click OK. And again, it's the same thing as the LAN policy going out. I'm not a fan of allowing everything outbound without controlling ports no matter what. So I don't like it, but I see it way too many times. And as a, entry get started, I think many will want this, and as a later step maybe to fine-tune those things. It's really up to you. I don't know, if you're starting a brand new network, it might be a good idea to from the get-go do some good security practice. But if you are simply changing any competitive firewall to SonicWall and that's what they add, and you just want to do the exact same and later on tighten the security, I'm a fan of it. So that's what I've done in the past. If I had to change any firewall to SonicWall, what I was doing is let's replicate exactly what is into the old firewall, and even if there are stuff that are really bad security wise, I will just replicate them, put the firewall in there, and make sure it stays there for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, just so that the customer in his mind is like, yep, the new firewall just works perfectly. Because if you start from the get-go and you go all in security, you may have stuff that will not work, and the customer will be like, well, it's not because the security is tightened that it doesn't work. Many customers will just say, you know what, take that firewall out, put the old one back, that one was working. So the issue is not the new firewall, is you've been too crazy on the security from the get-go. So my personal recommendation was do the exact same ugly config that was there. It goes in the mind of the customer, yes, the new firewall works. And then tighten the security, and if something doesn't work, the customer will be like, well, it's not because of the new firewall, it's been there for a month. So they will ask you, and they will not tell you take that firewall out, right? So all that to say, you decide what you want to do with policies. I strongly advise you control outbound ports. And the other one here we can look at, remember I told you network segregation is key, the shop and the assembly line should be isolated. Well, maybe you do need people in the company, like in the LAN and the other network, to be able to access the production line, right? Maybe you do have engineers that needs to monitor how things are going, so then you can go see policy from LAN to the shop. And again, there are none. So what you could do is say, well, and then yes, please be very specific. So I need this guy, either a user or an IP address, to access this specific device on this specific port. So be very specific into what you allow. And you can also ensure you do have login enabled, so you know who did what and when and who accessed things. So if the shop is stopping to work at a specific time, then you can look at logs and say, yep, that was John that connected into that network and most likely screwed everything up. So that was a quick introduction. I hope it helps you to get started. Next, I would advise you look in the description box down below, but personally, the next step to get going and set a firewall is to turn on security services. So I've put links in the description box down below. So far, I've done video on antivirus, IPS, and content filtering. So I would advise, personally, my next step when this is done, I've set my interfaces, I've done access rule for things to work, is to turn on security. So hopefully that will really help you to get going, and make sure you subscribe, because next I want to do other video on multi-WAN and also on the other features that are there. So I hope it was useful. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.